Welcome everyone to ZETA's March Tech Talk, online scams targeting Gen Z and aging Americans, a conversation across generations impacted. I'm José, President and CEO of ZETA, and I'm excited to lead today's conversation on a topic that affects all of us, regardless of age, background, or digital experience. Online scams are getting more sophisticated every day. It's easy to think of scams as something that happens to other people, but the truth is, anyone can really fall victim to scams. Whether it's fake job offers, fraudulent investment opportunities, romance scams, or identity theft, these schemes are evolving with technology and targeting both younger and older generations in different but equally damaging ways. So how do we fight back? There's a few big questions to consider here. How do we recognize and avoid these scams? What's the emotional and financial toll of being scammed? And what can we do to protect ourselves and our communities moving forward? To help us answer some of these questions, we have two really phenomenal experts joining us today. Both bring decades of experience in consumer protection, scam prevention, and public education. First speaker I'm going to talk about is Debra Berlyn. Our first speaker, a nationally recognized expert in consumer protection, digital literacy, and tech policy. She is the executive director of the Project to Get Older Adults Online, or Project GOAL, and has spent her career working to bridge the digital divide for older Americans. Deb has been a leading voice in consumer advocacy, partnering with policymakers and organizations to protect vulnerable communities from scams and fraud. She currently advises the National Consumers League and has worked extensively on public policy efforts to enhance digital security and awareness. With her deep knowledge of consumer protection and the unique challenges older Americans face in the digital world, Deb is going to help us unpack how some of these scams are impacting aging populations and what we can do to combat these threats effectively with this demographic. Our second guest joining us is Melissa Lanning, the Executive Director of the BBB Institute for Marketplace Trust, the educational foundation of the Better Business Bureau. Mel is the primary spokesperson for the BBB Institute and co-author of several major research reports, including the BBB Scam Tracker Risk Report. Under her leadership, the BBB Institute has launched and revamped their Scam Tracker, a platform that has helped consumers avoid losing an estimated $43 million in 2024 alone. She and her team have developed resources like the Scam Prevention Guide and the Scam Survival Toolkit to help consumers stay informed and protected. Through initiatives like the Military and Veterans Initiative, she has also worked to shield vulnerable communities from financial fraud. Mel's work puts her at the forefront of identifying and analyzing scam trends, and today she'll give us some insight into how scams are evolving and what strategies are most effective in preventing them. Deb, Mel, I have to say I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you, Jose, for setting this up today and picking such a great topic for us to discuss. It's so important for consumers, for the Gen Z community, and for the aging community that I work with. So thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I want to talk about, even before jumping into the conversation, I always have to give my piece. And I have to say there's a real significance in this conversation. And I've certainly heard it in my advocacy work over the years, and I'm sure you all have as well. There's always a call for folks to organize intergenerationally. And I think that that's something that's very true across industries, across advocacy areas. We always talk about how are we building pipelines of communication, how are we building intergenerational coalitions. And I'm really proud to say that we brought this conversation together specifically because we want to start to build those bridges and tackle some of these issues like online scams together intergenerationally. So I'm just so proud of that and so excited to have this conversation because this is what building that intergenerational collaboration looks like, right? Yeah. So, the first question that I want to get into to kind of help us transition into this discussion is scams have changed a lot in the last decade, even, especially with advances in technology and social media. I think we've all seen that AI is contributing a lot to that. From your perspectives, what are the biggest shifts you've seen in how scams are operating today? And I'm happy to open that up to either of you.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a first stab at that, and I would just say, you mentioned, Jose, that it is true that online scams have changed the game, and I think since COVID impacted us in 2020, we have seen certain scam types skyrocket. So, for example, for years we saw online shopping scams kind of go up because people were forced to be home. So, I think one of the messages here is scammers are constantly changing their game. They are changing how scams are being perpetrated. So we've seen we've seen and know that if you are targeted online, you're more likely to lose money because of all the different ways that you can be targeted. I think one of the things we've seen in our data that's sort of shifting is we will continue to see those online shopping scams, which are much more transactional and quick. But what we're seeing is more scammers who are building trust with their prospective victims. And they're spending more time setting up the scam. And what we're seeing is, in the end, we're seeing that the monetary losses are going up with those particular high touch type scams. And I can talk more about that, but that's one of the significant shifts that we're seeing in recent years.
Yeah. I think that's really important perspective because with so many advances in technology, it's hard for, I think, the average individual who's at home and maybe is getting some of these texts or messages online to really understand the fraud ecosystem operating and evolving that is constantly evolving to better target them. Deb, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah. So a couple points, and thanks, Melissa, for that, for Mel, for that. It is, you're hitting on so many points there, the new technologies. A couple of points that I want to make for the older adult community. It's everything new and not so new as well when it comes to scams. So it's phone calls and online communications as well. Communications that come with texts, with emails, as well as the old school phone calls, whether they come at home or on your wireless device. It's everything. It's everything everywhere all at once when it comes to scams. So for an older adult, it's critical that they be aware that it's hitting them from all sorts of communications. And new technologies make it more difficult to figure out what is real and what is not real.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does, right? And I think there's a piece of this conversation, again, going back to this intergenerational conversation, the collaboration here that we're trying to build out intentionally. I think to speak to that, we want to clarify something here for the audience as well. Before moving into that conversation a little bit more as well. So there is a tendency, I think, by society and particularly by younger folks to maybe overgeneralize individuals that are over 60 into one kind of category, right? To say, this is our older American population, our aging American population. But what's really important when we talk about, technology and our perception of technology is to also distinguish that there are multiple groups within that broad category, right? And the way that these technologies are being developed and impacting them really changes depending on what particular group you're looking at, even just with our 60 plus generation. Would you all want to provide some clarity, particularly you, Deb? Would you want to provide some clarity on, what distinctions we see in our, 60 plus demographic?
Jose, it's a huge range when we talk about older adults. What is that community? 60 plus, AARP has you join at 50 plus. So what is an older American today? It's a wide range of individuals. It's a community that's still at work. It's a community that is perhaps elderly. So older adults is a huge wide range, and their touch with technology varies as well. What devices they use to communicate varies. Their digital literacy varies. So it's a huge range. I love looking at some of the statistics about where we're going as well with the aging population. I want to just throw a quick few out there because it touches perhaps the Gen Z understanding of our aging population. So if we look 9 years ahead, not that far off, the percentage of individuals will actually shift a bit. The demographics will shift. And for the first time in history, the individual percentage of those 60 and older will be greater than those under the age of 18. So we have very shifting demographics in this country as well as globally. We're getting older. And I'd like to also say that a welcome to the Gen Xers in this country, that every day in 2025, they are turning 60 years and above. So happy birthday and welcome to the older adult community.
I think that's really important to clarify, right? Particularly for that context, individuals that are looking to engage intergenerationally, to build these coalitions, organize these conversations, to see where our strengths are and how we can support each other in addressing something like online scams. It's important to get an understanding of who actually makes up that profile. I think Gen Z is equally as interesting because you have folks that are as old as maybe 27 or 28, and folks as young as like 15 or 14, depending on who you ask where the cutoff is. And so you have folks that are in the workforce, recent graduates, but you also have folks that are still in high school, right? High school age children. And the defining characteristics there are interesting too, and we could get into another conversation about what makes a Gen Z person, but even some of those defining characteristics within our demographic are very different, right? There's those that maybe in their youth, very older Gen Z, were very defined by maybe experiencing the recession of 2008, or 9/11 if they're old enough to remember. But then you have very young Gen Z that really their kind of defining experience as youth was the pandemic. And so even within our demographic, you're getting really unique life experiences that are shaping the way that they're interacting with technology and the world. So we could get into that for a long time and talk all about that, but we won't today. But that's good context for the conversation. I think I've sufficiently talked about some of that transition to the discussion, so I want to kick us off with our first section here, which is scam trends and their impact. So let's talk about who is getting scammed and how scams are affecting people, right? Mel, your team at the BBB Institute releases the Scam Tracker Risk Report each year. The 2024 report showed a big shift in overall susceptibility and the median dollar loss for individuals. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why we may see a relative decrease in susceptibility, but a rise in median loss?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the risk report, our latest risk report was actually published last week. It is brand new data from 2024. You can download that for free. If anyone is really interested in digging into results, it's free and it's online to download. The data in there is essentially it's reports that are submitted to BBB Scam Tracker, which is our prevention and reporting tool. And I would just want to say that we call it a prevention tool because we publish the reports on that platform, and you can actually search by URL, email, and so forth. And that's the reason people are able to avoid losing money when they go there. What you mentioned, Jose, is we saw a slight decrease in susceptibility. And what that means is the percentage of reports that were submitted with a monetary loss. So, in other words, the percentage of people who were targeted who said they lost money to the scam. And that actually went down slightly, not very much, but it did go down slightly. The more alarming piece that you mentioned is monetary loss. And overall monetary loss actually went up 30%. And so that means that the overall amount, so even though people were less likely to lose money, when they did lose money, they were losing more money in 2024. And so I would say that one of the reasons we suspect that is because I mentioned earlier this trend of these high touch scams that are kind of rising to the top in terms of being risky. So online investment scams, cryptocurrency scams, employment scams that you mentioned, romance and friendship scams, so relationship scams. These are the scam types we saw rise on our list of riskiest scams in 2024. These are those high touch ones where the scammer spends more time, and they may spend days, they may spend weeks, they may spend months building a relationship with the person. And the result is that there's a high dollar loss that's involved. So when people do lose money to these, they're significantly higher in terms of monetary loss. And I think that is where we're seeing that significant increase in overall median dollar loss.
Yeah. I think there's something really interesting about, the narratives that I certainly remember hearing about on television as I was growing up, which were, there are these individuals, they pose to be, maybe someone that's romantically interested in an individual, and they're just able to kind of really operate surface level enough that it's a little believable. The emotional component starts to come into play now with AI, right? And the technology we have with the video components to some of these AI tools. I can imagine that, again, right? The ability to trick people has just grown so much more, especially for folks that maybe don't have that inherent kind of trained eye to be able to spot an AI video, right? Or something that's been altered digitally. So it's super concerning, right? But I do think it's also really valuable for folks to recognize and know that there are institutions that are putting out these reports and that are really monitoring this. Certainly, for folks that, are concerned about their susceptibility, maybe a parent's susceptibility, knowing that there are resources out there, I think is so important. Deb, I have a question for you, because if we look at the data from the FTC's 2024 report to Congress, it breaks down some of this information a little further, and it flags that adults over 80 are reporting even higher median individual loss, financial loss, property loss, about $1,400 compared to $800 for those aged 70 to 79. So even older Americans are experiencing greater loss. What would be your thought around, a potential reason for that discrepancy?
Well, I'd like to address that, Jose, by highlighting an example and use that to show what actually happens in that particular age group of older adults. So, we were talking about how we define older adults. I don't like to look at particular vulnerability or, are elderly more fragile or more susceptible? But, there are certain situations. So I want to illustrate it by talking about an individual who actually lives in our DMV. And her name is Gladys, and she's 81 years old. And just recently, this past fall, she received a phone call, which she thought was from someone with the Social Security Administration. And she was told that in order to secure her money with her Social Security funds, she needed to do a transaction. She needed to secure her money. And she, of course, was concerned, but she was not sure that this was real. And she said, I don't trust this call. If you really are the Social Security Administration, you need to follow it up with an official letter to me. So they said, of course. And they sent her a letter which looked exactly like it was from the government. So, and they said, of course, which was a red flag, that, you need to do it quickly. And so they sent her instructions about moving her money to two different banks, to take it out of her bank and move it to two different banks. And she incurred losses upwards toward $100,000 by moving this money quickly to two banks, which were unfortunately overseas. And she lost that money. And unfortunately, she didn't inform her family until it was in process. And at that point, it was too late to stop it. And so I think there is a combination of a fear factor when it comes to, you have to do this to secure your money. And with individuals in that age group, there is the building up of a nest egg for your financial security. And scammers know that this age group has financial security. They have saved up money, which they rely on, and this money is vulnerable. And they prey on that nest egg financial security. And I think that comes into play in that particular age group.
It's almost hard to think about what to say to that, because it's such an unfortunate, situation that we find ourselves in, where we have so many folks that I can't imagine the sense of loss, right? Working for such a large amount of time to build up this nest egg, that sense of security that provides, for individuals, as we age, only to just fall, victim to one of these unfortunate situations, in a way that is so convincing, right? And is going to continue to get more convincing. It really is something that, speaking to our Gen Z folks, and those folks that may be, kind of listening in, it's something we need to think about as well, right? One, because this is going to impact folks potentially within our families, but also because it will impact us as well, right? I mean, these scams are also getting better and targeting us in different ways, but at some point we will, hopefully be in a position where we're also building up, our nest eggs and getting ready to maybe retire, and we need to be vigilant of how to protect our assets as well. There's something that's interesting to me about some of these trends, which is that there's a repeat victimization. In fact, the BBB report that we referenced found that over 12% of scam victims were targeted multiple times. And I'm curious to know, and maybe this is an open question, why do people keep why are people targeted multiple times? And then maybe, how or why are folks falling victim to these targets multiple times?
So I can start with that. So it wasn't, so in the report, it wasn't just that they were being targeted multiple times. It was that they lost money multiple times when they were targeted. I would say probably almost all of us are targeted multiple times because the scams are so prevalent right now. But unfortunately, we've seen 3 years in a row that chronic victimization percentage of people has increased. I think one thing to think about is there are a lot of recovery scams. We don't talk about those as much, but once you've lost money, and there are scammers that'll come at you and offer to get your money back or repair your credit or consolidate your debt. And so that's an unfortunate sort of follow-up to those who have been impacted and hurt by scams, is there are the other scammers that are ready to kind of jump in and take advantage yet again, which is really awful. The other thing I would say is that we know from some of the research that we've done, and we did a report called Exposed to Scams with the Finra Foundation. And we found that people who are financially vulnerable are more susceptible too. So again, if somebody has lost a significant amount of money and they're struggling, they may be more susceptible, especially one of those types of scams where it's, for example, a sweepstakes scam that comes in, and you almost want to believe it. You're in such a dire situation where you desperately need a solution. You may be more likely to not do the research and follow up and get scammed again. So there's a lot of factors that play into this. And the only thing I'll add to that, and then I'll let Deb talk, is just a reminder again, and it's just echoing what you said, Jose, is that everyone is being targeted, everyone is being impacted by scams. And we do need to break down the stereotypes that there's certain people who are more vulnerable. That's not true. Well, I think when you break it down by the different demographics, you just see that we're all being impacted. It's just that we're being impacted by the different scam types and so forth. And so I just wanted to say that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mel. And the unfortunate thing about the scammers is how unscrupulous they are. They follow the tragedies, whether they be a one that's caused by some natural disaster, setting up scams to help with recovery from a natural disaster, or a personal one, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that. But following, someone with a loss, and trying to help perhaps with someone who's gone through a divorce, or a widow or widower. They are unscrupulous, and they try and pick up on that and hit you with a scam when you are perhaps most vulnerable in that way, from a personal or financial loss.
I think that's really interesting, because there's a psychological component to the way that these scams are operating, right? And I think the last question for this section, scam trends and their impact, was, we've talked about the financial scams, but what about the emotional side of it? And it seems that the emotional component is driving these scams, but then there's also this knowledge that these scammers have to then further take advantage of folks because they have become emotionally vulnerable as a result of falling victim to these one of the scams to begin with. And so there's kind of a cycle, and the emotional vulnerability certainly, I'm sure, can exacerbate the susceptibility to falling victim again, right, to the scams. That's super unfortunate. And again, I think really underscores just why it's so important for us to be educated on just how often these scams are targeting us. I think I get texts every single day from like a quote unquote like UPS store trying to track me down to give me a package or something. And it's just, it is something that you learn to ignore, but if you're having an off day and you accidentally click on something, it really can open up a can of worms, which is really unfortunate. We're going to go into our second section here and talk about how Gen Z and older adults are targeted, and talking about some of that overlap. To reference the BBB report again, the report found that both older adults and Gen Z, ages 18 to 24, reported those higher median losses compared to other age groups. I'm curious to ask, why do we think that is? Why do we think that both those, young adults and our older Americans are seeing those higher median losses?
So I would say we haven't done any research on the causation directly to really fully understand that. But what I would say about that, again, it kind of goes back, I think, to the scam types that are typically targeting specific age groups. So, for example, yes, for our report, ages 65 plus reported a higher median dollar loss, but right behind them, not too far behind them, were ages 18 to 24. So they're both, like you said, Jose, both losing significant amounts of money. So if we look at ages 18 to 24 in our report, you can see that employment scams are number one riskiest for that age group, which makes sense, right? They're getting out of college, they're looking for jobs. And so, and that scam type has a high median dollar loss. And so that is why we've seen, I think, the shift over the last few years of that age group. They used to, I think, online purchase scams, online shopping scams used to be the number one riskiest, right? That's a typical loss of like $75, right? It's not going to change your life. But those employment scams have a median dollar loss on around $1,500, which is significantly higher than the overall median dollar loss of $130. So again, as scammers shift their tactics and how they're focusing on different age groups, that's really what I think is having an impact. And then when you look at the report, you'll see that older age groups, anyone 35 plus, the number one riskiest scams were those investment/cryptocurrency scams. And that's had a $5,000 median dollar loss, which is why older people had the higher loss overall. So it's the type of tactics and the type of scams that are being targeted. And as I mentioned, both of those scam types have higher median dollar losses because they're high touch and they're spending more time with the people. So yeah, that's one thing. I'd turn it over to Deb to see if she has anything to add.
Yeah, I think the statistics are really telling in pointing to the type of scams that in terms of the dollar losses. I think it also, for the Gen Zers, the employment scams are definitely a great way for the scammers to target that community that are, really hunting for jobs and hunting online. So they are susceptible to that sort of scam. For the older adult population, that hope that they can maybe turn their retirement dollars into more dollars is certainly with these investment scams. And today, we may see additional scams that will hunt for individuals who have recently lost their jobs, or, really, I think we have to carefully think about what's going on as things happen. I mentioned the natural disasters, but we have a lot going on right now with a number of people losing their jobs. So, there'll be scams that will pick up on what's happening right now. What are people concerned about? What is happening to their dollars? Are they concerned about a job? Are they concerned about their benefits? Are they concerned about their savings? That's where scams get one step ahead of us. They are right there to pick up on what is that emotional toll.
Right. I think that's something that certainly makes me think back to the pandemic, right? I think we saw a big uptick in scams that were trying to go after folks who were receiving the stimulus checks during the pandemic. And I think there's an emotional component to that as well. You mentioned the job search with particularly Gen Z. I think there's an emotional driver there, right? You talk about young folks who are looking for jobs. Maybe they're going to have to start paying their student loans off soon. They just graduated. And so they really are, in an emotional, vulnerable place as well, become more susceptible. And I'll admit, I've actually gotten those emails quite a bit, right? And I'm not sure how I ended up on some of those lists, but I've gotten a lot of those messages on LinkedIn, on email, where I get offered a job. And the funny thing is, it's never a relevant job to anything I do. It's always some very random job in some other industry. And I can imagine that if you're someone, and I actually have gotten also real emails that look very similar from scouts or from, someone that's just out there trying to network. And so it is with those, particularly with those email or LinkedIn messages, sometimes it's almost indistinguishable, right? To really know, is this real or not? And so I've just defaulted to not really responding to anybody unless I've met them in person, which is one way to go about it, I guess. But there is certainly an emotional component there too. And I've experienced those kinds of scams personally. Yeah. And that's scary because they ask for all sorts of information, right? Social security information, address, age. Eh, I mean, they collect a lot of information. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Jose. That's what they're looking for. And with we haven't talked about impersonation scams. You know, that is at the heart of all the texts and emails that you get that look like they're coming from your bank, your healthcare provider, your, you know, the Social Security Administration, the government in some way, that they're, you know, texting you, they're emailing you, or perhaps someone you've an online shopping provider that you've done business with, and they're texting you. It's a simple text to say, "Hey, we're trying to deliver your package. You know, you need to confirm your bank with us, your bank business with us, because your account, there's something suspicious in your account. We want to make sure everything is okay. You know, click on here." Sometimes they'll even give you a phone number to call, but what they're looking for is something: your credit card number, your social security number, your bank account, that they can use to grab your personal information. And that's the whole key. And that's the kind of thing that trips folks up. So, you know,
Yes.
it may not be the huge dollars of, you know, an investment scam, but it's dollars. It's dollars out of your pocket, and it may eventually lead to huge dollars.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing on that, on the
Of
employment
course.
scam? Um, One of the main tactics we've seen over the years, I think it's worth explaining to folks here, and it's changing. So I don't want folks to just camp here and say this is how it works always, because scammers change their tactics all the time. But one of the main things that they've typically done in the past is they will hire you. You may even start the job for them. And then what they do is they'll send you an official check in the mail. Sometimes they'll FedEx it, UPS, to make it look even more official. They tell you, again, it's a red flag: deposit this immediately, and then immediately transfer money to this other account, whether it's for training or home office equipment, whatever it is,
Mhm.
not knowing that this is a bad check. And so a lot of times, for folks who may be a little younger and may not know fully how checks work because they don't use checks as often as we used to, and you know, for me, I grew up with that. They transfer those funds. That's real money that they're transferring out of their own account. And then
Mm.
once the bank realizes it's a bad check, they're out that money. They have to pay it
Mm.
back. And so I wanted to just highlight that's one of the things. And then another piece of this is we're now seeing these fake employers ask the new hire to start a crypto account. And then again, the cryptos become part of the scam type again. And that's what I wanted to just explain to you, is the tactics are constantly changing based on what's really working with these scam types. So that's just another thing to just be aware of in terms of, especially this with this scam type.
I really appreciate that flag, and I'm not ashamed to admit I still have to Google just to double check every time I fill out a check, you know, what goes where. And you're right, there is a generational divide there in the in the understanding of how some of these things work, especially when it comes to, and I think we had talked about this before this conversation, knowing how to engage with brick and mortar institutions, right? I have some recollection of kind of what banks used to be like before digital banking started to really take over with my generation. But even I mean, yeah, I still have to, you know, Google how to write a check every now and then, or how to send off an envelope in the mail. And so I can imagine that if you're getting something in the mail, you're getting a check, there's a sense of comfort maybe that's not real, that you're as a young person, you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, this is legitimate. It came in the mail. It's a physical check. It looks legitimate, so that you're checking off those boxes in your head. When in reality, I mean, that is a very smart scam that I could see folks falling victim to, particularly our contractors, right? And Gen Z has so many digital entrepreneurs, and so I think that's a great flag for contractor folks and for entrepreneurs. We I want to talk just briefly about our folks that are under 18. I think this is a really hard conversation to have, but there are so many children that are also falling victim to these online scams. And I think we've all heard some of those stories of, the kid who accidentally orders, everything they want off of Amazon with their mom's credit card. And then they get like 100 boxes in the mail, and the parents don't even know until all the boxes show up, right? A day or two later. But there is a susceptibility there. And that's one of the more lighthearted stories, right? I think there are other more serious scams. What the question is, are we doing enough to prepare our children? I'm sure the answer is we could be doing more. And so I'm curious to know from your perspectives, what do you think we could be doing additionally to help with that susceptibility of our children?
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge first that, right, that our children are starting their lives online, right? Like a lot of what they're doing, like it's just so different than it just evolves over time, and more and more children are spending more and more time online, and we know that when you're online, you're susceptible. You could be targeted by a scam, and so we found that's going up year over year. And I will just tell you, we don't collect data from anyone under the age of 18. We ask their parents, and so even what we're collecting, we're not fully understanding what the true impact is, because I guarantee you, a lot of parents don't even know, right, how much their kids are being targeted. But the other thing I would just add on this, I think parents need to set up some, guardrails around, kids being online, but we also need to just teach them, because I do think the comfort level for them of being online, they're just so used to it. They feel safer. They feel maybe safer than they should. And just because you understand technology, which they do, they understand it, they live it, they breathe it. But just because you understand it in that way doesn't mean that you have built up the digital safety skills that you really need to have online. And I think we need to spend more time with younger people, building up those digital safety skills, if you will, on how to stay safe online. I don't want them to be less comfortable necessarily, but I do think we just need to get them to be a little more skeptical and a little bit more cautious while they're online, because the exposure is real. And I would just go ahead, Deb. I'm sure you have more to add.
Yeah, now I was going to say that one of the ties we have between Gen Zers and older adults is that we're both very concerned about privacy and keeping our data safe. So, I think both of our communities are very focused on that. When it comes to our maybe younger Gen Zers or under 18 folks, but maybe the lower end of that, and our alphas, I think we have to bring in our parents into that process, and also I think we have to figure out, as Mel mentioned, the ways to secure our devices themselves. So it's part a technology solution. It's three things. It's involving the parents, it's technology, as well as the industry itself. So I think that the example you used of getting 100 boxes from Amazon, problem solved. Amazon will cover that problem. You tell Amazon, I got 100 boxes because my 9-year-old or my 8-year-old got online and ordered 100 boxes. They'll say, no problem. We'll cover that. But
that's right.
There are others in the marketplace who may not be as willing to help with that issue. So we have to get the industry, the broad spectrum of the industry, to join in helping to work with us to protect our youth in this space. So I think it's all three of those that we need to work together to protect our youth. Our very young youth. I have a lot of alphas that are grandchildren, and from as soon as they can move their fingers onto a screen, they're there. And it's really young. unfortunately. But they're using their screens. So
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah, that's 100% right. And we have two generations now, um, younger than Gen Z, right? We have Generation Alpha, and now our new babies, yeah, our Generation Beta, which I think started this year, right? The babies that are being born this year, and so this is a reality, right? Gen Z may have been the first. Labeled digital native generation, we have two more that are now coming up behind us. And so that reality of growing up as toddlers in a digital world is very much there. And I don't think you can expect a toddler to understand the nuance of online safety and scams. We have to create those guardrails, right? I'm 100% in agreement there. Um, Deb, for you specifically, I have this question. Older Americans have usually been targeted through traditional contact methods like phone calls, but we are seeing an increase in online scams affecting our older adults. And I know that your work and the work of Project Goal is so uh, 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 tuned in on how we are increasing digital access and connectivity for our older Americans. How are you all seeing the need and addressing preparedness with this demographic of older Americans that we are trying to get connected, trying to provide digital access to, but are now falling victim to online scams in addition to still being targeted with phone call scams?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yes, so I'm a tech proponent. I want all our older adults to be online. So many great benefits to having a device of some sort and being able to connect. That is what I've been working on since Project Goals started, to get more older adults online, as evidenced by the pandemic. It's really important to have that connection to family and friends, to be able to connect to your doctor and shop online and entertainment and a whole host of things. Certainly that brings some challenges. And so scams and fraud are some of those challenges. And how do you do that? Well, one of my concerns and one of the reasons why I focus on this issue is that I don't want anyone who has concerns about those risks to say, you know what, I don't want to be online because I am concerned that I could be scammed. So that is not one of the end results that I want from the problem with scams. So, we need to work together to address this issue, because the last thing we want to have happen is for someone to say it's too much of a risk. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be in this online environment.
Th- that is the kind of thing that we should say twice, because, and you capture it so well, right? I think there are a number of folks who are concerned that these risks outweigh the benefit of being connected online. And with the ever growing digital economy and connectivity online, I think it's so important for us to recognize that there is value in helping everybody be connected, right? But we need to provide them with the tools and the digital literacy to know how to navigate these online spaces. But I appreciate you saying that, because we certainly don't want to discourage anybody from being connected. It's important in today's world. There's so much opportunity there. There's so much community building there, intergenerationally again. And so really appreciate you saying that. Just wanted to reiterate, because we need to look at it that way, 100%. And that's certainly why the work of Project Goal is so valuable.
Yes, thank you. And so when we get to the point where we want to talk about solutions, we'll talk about that. But that is the foundation for this. Is let's keep everyone online. Let's try and work on solutions that will keep them safe.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to move us into our third section here, which is exploring some of these high-risk scams a little bit further. We've talked about some of them. We've talked about the BBB report that identified those three scam types that are most common and riskiest. Investment scams, we talked about cryptocurrency specifically and how that's especially an area of concern for these scams. Employment scams and our younger folks who are maybe, more prevalently on the job hunt as they're entering the workforce, and then the romance scams. The first question that I have is, why do these types of scams work so well? I think we started to get into that a little bit. We started talking about some of the emotional drivers that make people a little bit more susceptible. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't touch on that you all would flag that is a reason as to why these scams work so well?
So first of all, one thing I would say is some of these scams are happening. They're happening overseas. Like some of the scams that are targeting Americans are happening overseas. I will say that we know there's a psychological playbook that they're taught. So these are professional criminals. These are folks who understand how to manipulate their targets. So they're really, really good at this. So I just wanted to mention that. And then I want to maybe just give an example of one scam victim of a scam survivor that we know to explain what happened to her. And it kind of can highlight some of how this happens. We know that people who are isolated or lonely are more susceptible to scams. We also saw in our most recent report that people who have gone through major life changes may be susceptible to scams. So if they've gone through a divorce or something like that, they just might be distracted enough, right, where someone could manipulate them in a way. They're emotionally vulnerable at that point. We had a last year during our Scam Survivor Day event. It's something we did to recognize the needs of survivors. We highlighted some of the stories of our survivors, and there is a woman who who told her story, and she's in her 30s. She's a technologist, has a brilliant career, So again, let's break down the stereotypes of who this is happening to. She was newly divorced and met somebody online who became her soulmate. And this went on for many, many months. And this person happened to mention that they were, had significant amounts of money. And of course, eventually the conversation came around to how did this person get money? And it was through cryptocurrency investments. And I would be happy, my soulmate, my best friend, I'd be happy to show you how this works. And what happened over time is she started putting money into a platform and started to see the significant growth of her money. She started small, little amounts. She pulled it back in so that she could make sure she could get it back out. She did everything right, which is just making sure that this was, and then she slowly put it more in. She ended up losing hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time she got to a point where it had grown so significantly. And she was then suddenly told she couldn't get it back out without paying a fee. And that's when she started to realize that it was a scam. And so I wanted to tell that story because that's one of the big things that's happening. It's somebody who's manipulating a person who's just been through a lot in their life and needed something. They're filling a gap in that person's life. We hear from some scam survivors who are still talking to the scammer even after they've realized that it's a scam. Because they're filling that need for that person who's feeling socially isolated. So I just want to quickly just tell that story, and I'll let Deb add anything she wants to that.
Yes. So I heard that story last year, and it is heartbreaking because it was an incredible financial loss for her. So I just want to build on that by saying, there is an isolation factor that they build on as well. It is often someone that may be isolated in some way. For an older individual, they may be living in some sort of isolated way, either living on their own or living in a way that they don't have regular daily communication of, with, or next to a friend who they could maybe call on to say, what the heck is this? But the financial loss for this woman in her 30s, she hopefully will be able to rebuild her life and put it back together. If you think of someone in their 80s who has a significant financial loss, that is something that they don't have the opportunity to rebuild. That is the end of their opportunity to live independently, to rebuild any opportunity for finances. And that woman who is 81 years old, who had that financial loss, lost her home and won't be able to probably live independently for the rest of her life. So, when you're looking at someone who is older and who has a significant financial loss due to a scam, that could potentially be the end of their independent financial independence financially. It may be the end of their being able to live independently, and it often has an emotional toll that their family feels that they no longer have um, their capability to think independently as well. How could you let this happen to you? You can't control your finances any longer as well. So it has a tremendous toll on someone that age. They can't really rebuild their lives the way they were living before.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to bring up in this conversation, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about one of my favorite shows actually on Netflix. Is maybe a show that you all are familiar with. It's called Grace and Frankie. Jane Fonda does an incredible job. So does Lily Tomlin, and I particularly love that show because as as a Gen Z person, it gives me perspective on some of those like day-to-day issues that our older Americans face. And in one of those episodes, that happens actually almost exactly as you just described it, right? They're kind of conned by, not digitally, but they're conned by a contractor who promises to fix their bathroom or something, and then they just gut their whole place. And what it does is actually it gives them that sense of despair. Financially, it's awful. But then, to your point, it also makes their children question their their ability to take care of themselves. And so it really like it has a huge impact across financial stability, but then also that that relationship dynamic, particularly for our older Americans with their children. And that's one of the episodes that really stands out to me, because you just kind of see them experience this very very targeted scam, but then they're also questioned, right? Their ability to identify things and be cognitively aware was questioned. Great example, great show for anyone that wants a show recommendation if they haven't seen it already. I think it's beautifully done. A whole team of incredible actors. But there is something there that we're also touching on in this section, which is the isolation, the kind of modern loneliness epidemic. I think particularly after the pandemic, we've seen that folks have started to relearn how to kind of socialize publicly, and because of the digital world now, we're seeing a lot more engagement and community building online. And so I can imagine, and this is maybe an open question, that this the scams are targeting us and taking advantage of the fact that we are experiencing this loneliness epidemic, right? Particularly our older Americans.
Yes, but I will respond to that, Jose, and also open the door to it not only being older adults, that the isolation, the loneliness is not only something that older adults are experiencing. I think very young people are experiencing that as well. Particularly, I think that we are often living, and the pandemic, perhaps, that was a heightened period of that, but I still think we are feeling that. And I think that certainly does create some opportunity for these scams to be more successful and to tap on that loneliness factor, that feeling of wanting to connect on all different levels, but on deeper levels. So yes, older adults feel that, and isolation is not, there's social isolation, which is very different than physical isolation. So I think many of us are socially isolated in today's world.
That's a wonderful flag. Thank you, Deb. I think that is something for us to consider in the conversation, that young folks are just as, impacted, or impacted, I should say, by our loneliness epidemic, particularly after the pandemic, and in today's digital world where we all kind of gravitate attention towards our screens. Yeah, I say as I'm looking at 4 different screens. Yeah. Well, I'm going to move us into our final section here of the conversation, which is forward-looking, the future scam threats and how we can prepare ourselves to fight back against these scams. In 2024, online scams did make up over 61% of all scams reported. And as we become more digitally dependent, I'm curious to know and contemplate, what risks should we become more aware of when it comes to digital scams?
So one thing I would just highlight from our most recent report is social media is the contact method that had where more people were reporting losing money. This is where they were typically connecting with the scammer. We haven't talked about it as much today. I do want to just highlight that is something for folks to just think about, right? When they're on social media, just be careful about what you're sharing. And if you connect with someone, just be careful. We found that 50% of the scams, people told us, that started with a person reporting connecting on a social media advertisement, but 15% started when the scammer themselves sent a direct message. So that's where you're on a platform and somebody's trying to connect directly with you. So that's 15, that's not insignificant, right? That's 15% of people who are targeted that way. So it is something to just be wary of, that when you're browsing, to remember there is still a risk, it's entertainment, right? You're just kind of going through, but just be aware. The other thing I wanted to point out too is every year we do a research, we ask sort of what was the one thing that helped a person avoid a scam. And the number one thing that comes up every year is that gut check. Something just didn't feel quite right about the situation. And so one of the things that's a very general tip that I wanted to highlight is just, if something feels off, just take a pause, just stop. Don't click on the link, either hang up the phone if you need to, disconnect or disengage with that situation immediately and talk to somebody else, because that's how most people who said they were able to kind of avoid the situation, where they just felt something wasn't quite right. And so I guess that's just a reminder for folks that if there's something that's your gut saying this just isn't feeling right, just follow through on that. Listen to yourself, because you actually you're picking up on something that's probably really important. I won't go into red flags right now because I think we could do that right at the end. But I just wanted to highlight some of those critical pieces. But and also just there are things online you can do, and we can go through some of those things to protect yourself as well. But I'll turn it over because I'm sure Deb wants to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, to pick up on that, just that last point, I love saying to individuals to employ healthy skepticism online. That's my way of saying the same thing, Mel, is that, when you're online, just have some skepticism about what you're looking at, which is, basically the same way of saying that stop and think about it before you click. But to answer your question, Jose, I think that as we are moving forward, I think the technology is making a critical difference. You mentioned AI. AI and Gen I are just giving scammers an opportunity to employ tactics that make it so difficult for individuals to know what is real and what is not real. So, we've all heard about the opportunity for you to get some sort of scam that might look real, that looks real, that sounds real, the voice of a relative, because they're able to replicate the voice of your grandparent, the voice of your grandson, the voice of your mother or father. They are able to do that with Gen AI and not have it just be a garbled, scratchy sounding voice, but the actual voice. So, now we are in a new phase with how scammers can use technology and employ it in scams to really make it very difficult. So, using that tip of, stop and with looking at everything with some skepticism to say, whoa, I better stop, check this out, not hit the link or hit reply until I'm absolutely sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great flag. I know that as someone who has a lot of video content online of my face moving, of my voice, I am always thinking about, like, what's the susceptibility for my family members to get a call from someone that sounds, a machine that sounds like me, saying, hey, I need this, right? Or give me access to this. And so I've told folks within my network, folks that I know would probably be, individuals called, just if I'm ever asking you for anything, hang up and call me back, and just, or let's, contextualize it. Let's make sure that you understand that it's me, right? Let's talk about things. Let's talk about, something that only I would know. And those are the kinds of things that I think are important to keep in your back pocket to know. But sometimes,
Yeah, I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say what we're doing right now. We're online. Our voice, our videos are out in the public domain. So here we are,
Yeah.
and we can have this used by scammers and very, very nicely out there as a, here we are, Gen I. They don't even have to do that much. So, I was just going to say, Jose, that one of the recommendations with family is to have a safe word, so if you get something, have a safe word that you can employ. But, have I done that yet with my family? No, but after this conversation, I think I will. But, that is one of the recommendations, because we're all out whether it's because of a Facebook posting or something like this, we're out there.
I think that opens up the big question here, right? Which is, what are those back pocket tools that we can share with folks that they should keep in mind? I think having safe words and really, recognizing that you do have to inquire, like, are you who you say you are? If you're asking me for money, or if you're asking me for access to something, you know, can you tell me, who your teacher was in third grade? But even that, right? Like, I mean, that's compromisable information. So it's like, what's your favorite food, right, from Thanksgiving? But these are all things that folks have to consider with also then their digital footprint. I have a whole social media account dedicated to the food that I love, and reposting my cooking. So that would be an awful question from me, right? Because anyone can go and find my social media account with all my food and say, oh yeah, you made this for Thanksgiving last year. That's not a very good question. But those are the kind of thought processes that I think we need to have with our loved ones, to make sure that we are protecting ourselves as a community, right? Like as a family unit. Yeah, but I'll open it up. What are the other back pocket tools that folks can keep?
Yeah, so there's kind of two things the way I look at it. There's sort of the technology that you should be taking advantage of, which is things like, 2FA, MFA, changing your passwords often, updating your privacy settings, keeping your devices and your software updated, making sure you're doing all that regular stuff to make sure that, you know, you're buttoning everything down, all your digital devices down as much as possible. Because that's sort of like a step one kind of thing. Freeze your credit. That's another thing, you know, just to be safe. You can always it's free to do now. I encourage everyone to think about that. And then the other thing I would just mention are just it's so hard. So first of all, we know that knowledge is protective. We know from our research, the more you know how scams work, the more protected and the more able you will be to be able to spot a scam and sort of disengage from the situation. And so I would say just know which scams are more likely to target you, but also just know some general things that you were just touching on, Jose, which is things like it's too good to be true. Anything that sounds a little too good to be true, a great job, you work from home, the pay's great, you know, not a lot of skills required, you know, back away. That's a gut check, right? If you're being pressured at any point to act very quickly and make a decision too soon, that's a huge red flag. So these are red flags that everyone anything that's unexpected, right? Like any phone call that you get or an email that you get or a text message that you did not expect, you don't have to respond to that in the way you go and do what you said. You go and you connect your bank directly, go check your Amazon account directly. All those things can protect you. Other things that are very similar, just knowing about that, is if a person tells you to get off one platform and start talking over here, huge red flag, right? Okay, you met on LinkedIn. Now they want to talk to you on WhatsApp. That's a red flag that there's something that's not quite right here. If they're telling you how to pay specifically, you have to pay this way, you know, give me a gift card for this, or you know, that's also another red flag. So these are just things, and we put this in, you know, I'm sure Deb has it on her website. We have all of this stuff on our website that you can always get sort of these just general things that are easier to remember versus knowing how every scam type works, which is just too hard to hold, right? So that's what I would suggest is like the you know, button down your devices and then just try to stay on top of and refresh yourself periodically on some of these general red flags.
Yeah. And I'll just add a couple to that. And I think maybe a couple, reframing a couple too, is that I during shopping periods when you're shopping online, so what I like to recommend is that you maintain a list of what you have purchased, because sometimes you will get those communications about, you know, your packages, you were having trouble delivering your package or something is wrong with your delivery, and you're like confused. Oh, you know, did I buy this or didn't I buy this? Just maintain a simple list of everything you've bought during those heavy purchasing times, holiday times, whatever, specials on deals times. You know, maintain a list of your purchases so you can easily track that. And I think that, you know, what I employ, and it sounds like you do as well, Jose, and probably you do as well, Mel, with that skepticism, is, you know, you never reply to anything unsolicited. So if you receive something and you didn't initiate that, it's like, uh-oh, no deal. Yeah, I just, you know, you don't reply. You check it, certainly check it out, but if it looks at all suspicious, I often check, where did this email come from? And I look at the address, and 90% of the time is an address that doesn't make any sense. But, you know, any unsolicited communication, you just don't touch it. And if it really looks real, check it out with someone first. I receive those sorts of emails as you do every single day, and they get better and better all the time. They look more and more legit. So I even had to go on a company's website to check what is the real domain of this company, because that communication looked 100% valid. But once I went to the company's domain, I realized, uh-oh, that is not the company's actual domain. but it took some sleuthing to figure it out. So, you have to really check this out, but unsolicited, don't reply.
Yeah.
So, the final thing I want to say is that it's really critically important to connect law enforcement to this whole scam business and report if you've been scammed, no matter how small it is. And we know that, these $75 type of scams, oh, not a big deal. I didn't lose that much. But reporting every single scam is critically important. So, the FTC does track all these, and it is important to report, because that's how they can connect the dots on these scams.
Just
Go ahead, Mel.
just one thing I wanted to add, and that is, if you should get targeted and you do lose money and you're impacted, be kind to yourself, right? Just please remember that these are professional criminals. And we know there's a high level of shame and trauma and embarrassment that goes along with being impacted by a scam. And I just want folks to know that you're not alone. This is happening to a lot of people. It's not your fault. This is what somebody else did to you, and to just please be kind to yourself and get assistance.
I think that's really wonderful for you to share as well, because it is true, right? These are folks that are very well equipped to scam us, unfortunately. I have two tools that I would share as well with folks. Again, back pocket tools. The first is I usually do a social media check. I find that the kind of social capital that you can gather from individuals on social media is pretty informative as well. If I get a weird email with some sort of offer or some sort of message, I'll oftentimes kind of go through that of, can I go to their website? Does their website look, structured and legitimate? If it does, I'll kind of take it a step further and say, okay, can I find them on social media? If they're some sort of private business, are there reviews from accounts that are real, or is every engagement that they have from a bot account that has no followers, no profile image? And so that is kind of the other layer that I'll take to go and verify before I even consider like engaging with something. And that happens to me a lot with like clothing, right? Like clothing brands, online clothing brands. Sometimes I'll see something really nice that I would love to buy, but I try to take a step back and say, well, let me go and see, is there real engagement? Are there real customers that I can really, really get that right gut feeling, right? Going back to that phrase, that are real, and not just, fake accounts. The other tool is with texts specifically. I think all of us should be in the habit of, if we're sending an initial text to somebody that we just met at a reception or at a party, a friend, a new friend, whoever it is, maybe a family member with a new phone number, never just send a hi text. And I'll take this moment to apologize to anybody that I might know that has sent me a just simple hello or a hi text. Probably in the last 5 years, I have not responded to that. Because again, like, there's no context, right? And so if I don't recognize the number, if you don't say, hi, this is, Jose, and we met at this conference, and you gave me your card and I'm going to follow up, I'm not responding unless you give me that context. So I think everyone should kind of have that as well as a marker for, what texts they respond to. And I apologize again to anybody that has sent me a hi text or a hello text. I'm not responding to you if I don't recognize your number. I think we're just about ready to close it out here, but I want to open it up to you, Deb and Mel, just in case there's anything else that you all think is important to flag, to share, to highlight as a part of this conversation. But this has been wonderful. I'll open the floor to you all.
I would just thank you for this discussion. I think we could probably talk for another hour about everything. And I appreciate, Jose, I appreciate your last advice about the hi text. I get those, and I'm sure other individuals who get them as well. And I'm always like, what is this? Do I know this person? Did I meet them? And it really is confusing. So thank you for mentioning that. I think that is great. I'm going to add that to my advice for the community because I think that that is a great one. So thank you for that. I really appreciate having an opportunity to talk about this. And I just want to say that I think that we have so many connections with our older adult community and our Gen Zers that we want to, continue to explore. So, thank you for highlighting this issue of scams. It's been a great discussion.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you, Jose, and thanks, Deb, for joining and being part of the conversation. We were really grateful for you to include BBB Institute for sure. It's been a great conversation. I think you've done an incredible job covering so many different aspects of this topic. So well done. One thing I forgot to mention when I mentioned scam survivors is that we actually launched a toolkit last year called the Scam Survival Toolkit, and that was created for people who are impacted by scams. It's a holistic tool. It has mental health resources. It has resources around if you're struggling to pay your bills, your credit's been hurt, so forth. So it looks at those non-financial impacts, but it also provides a tailored kind of next steps forward based on what actually happened to you. So I wanted to let folks know that that's out there. It's at bbb.org/survival toolkit.
I love that. Thank you so much. And to anyone that has joined us, thank you for joining us today for this critical conversation. Scams aren't just a financial issue. They're a digital safety issue, a mental health issue, and a community issue. We'll be sharing all of the resources mentioned from BBB Institute, Project Goal, and ZETA in this video on YouTube in the link below once it's published. And after this conversation, we'll make sure that it's also listed on our website, that we can make sure that those resources are flagged for folks on social media as a part of our campaign after this conversation. If you or someone you know has been targeted by a scam, report it, speak up, and help others avoid the same traps. And I would add to that something that Mel mentioned, which is be kind to yourself. Stay tuned for next month's Tech Talk. Thank you again, Deb, Mel, and all of you for being here and listening to this conversation. See you all next time.